All right, we're gonna let people continue to come in, so we'll give it a couple more minutes. All right, a couple more people are dragging in. I think we're gonna still give it 2 more minutes. All right, so maybe at like 5 after we'll start. And again, we are still looking for a note taker. All right, I think most of the gang is probably here. So hi, I'm Sean Turner. We're gonna do a little TLS interim here. We have our other co-chairs here. Deirdre is here as well, and so is Joe. And we got a bunch of other people. So I don't know, Deirdre and Joe, if you want to come off mute, say hi.
Hello.
Hello.
All right, so this is an official meeting of the IETF. We actually got the thing in time. So the note well applies. That means if you see something and know something about IPR, you need to say it, disclose it. This is mostly going to be about process, so that probably won't really apply, but keep this in mind. We have a bunch of other things that are listed there about working group policies, anti-harassment policies, code of conduct, etc. The next page is kind of highlighting those points about professional behavior and making sure that we keep it professional. If you have any questions, you can ask us, the chairs. If you think you've been treated badly, you can let us know. You can tell the ADs, you can tell a buds person, you can tell other people, you can say it yourself. We can go from there. So feel emboldened if you're feeling beaten down. All right, next. The agenda, really, we're just here to talk about the FAT process. So my hope is to do a long monologue with Joe and Deirdre kind of interjecting points about things that I forgot. And the basic idea is just kind of review the general intent for why we're even here talking about this. Then we're going to kind of discuss the process, probably just the high points. And then I actually have a diagram, which is in the slides, which will kind of go through what the actual FAT process is and then how it integrates with the actual working group process. And then at the end, if I get through that, then I kind of want to discuss and kind of open up to see what people feel, where it is that we can fix it, how you can help us fix it, and whether we think we need to document it more, flesh out the pictures, etc. Any questions? Going once. All right, cool. I didn't see anybody in the queue. All right. So the intent really here is, to preserve the existing security properties that we've already had proven by our security researchers. If you remember when we were, TLS 1.2 and earlier protocols were out, like they were just getting famous, coming up with these cute logos and writing these papers, and that was all great. And, right when we were thinking about doing 1.3, we kind of got together with a bunch of them and was like, hey, how do we change this dynamic? And really what it was is that they needed to write and publish papers on a protocol, and they needed to kind of integrate in our process for us to kind of pause while they did this review, and all worked out great. So at the end of the day with 1.3, we kind of changed the paradigm a little bit in the IETF for how to develop protocols. And basically we want to make sure that we maintain that pact that we kind of had with the security researchers. So the going in question really is, does anybody think this is a bad idea? I'm not seeing the people run to the queue, so I'm hoping that that nobody thinks that this is a bad thing. All right. So what are the kind of the big salient points really here are is that during working group adoption, we don't want the FAT process to kind of stop things being adopted. People that show up that write drafts don't have the expertise, but got an idea and like, hey, I want to write a draft about this. How are we gonna, get this going? So what we want basically is to have, at the time when the working group adoption is being done, is that the chairs can send it over and like get a review of the document, basically, just to try to make sure that the protocols not being completely blown up. And anything that's new is defined and actually is verifiable and is provable. And again, I just want to reiterate, we don't want this process to gate working group adoption. I will say that I was responsible for holding up a few things while we tried to figure out whether we were going to gate adoption, but we really don't want that to be the case. Joe?
Yeah, just it's not necessarily before working group adoption. Like we will ask typically for FAT input after working group adoption has occurred. Right.
Yep. All right, and then one of the other things that I think was kind of came up was like how do we actually deal with the liaison, or how do we actually deal with the FAT? And I think what we've tried to come up with was some middle ground, basically, from like complete radical openness to actually getting someone to respond. So we think what we're going to try to do is get a liaison person that will actually act as the interface, and so they'll be the ones that will collate the responses, note any consensus among the FAT experts or dissension, and actually then forward that along to the working group, and then they can act as the kind of the go-between, essentially, between the working group and the and the FAT. And we're thinking that that's kind of a good way because it's another person who's kind of in the loop, who kind of understands this stuff, and then we as the chairs, the authors, and others can interact with them, on the mailing list to make sure that the questions get answered. And it may just be like, what do you mean? And then the idea is that like during the initial process, right? The output from the FAT process is like, A, we think you need some analysis, or no, you're good to go. If it's like, we need more analysis, like, well, what does that mean? And what does the shape of that look like? And then we can kind of jump in and help hopefully kind of form that and make sure that it's well understood and then go from there. But then again, as you know, the working group could decide whatever it wants to do with the document, so they could completely blow it up. And so you have to check the whole thing later as well. And that's kind of the next point, is that when we go to the before, like right before working group last call, when we think the document's fairly stable, we'd really like to kind of send it at that point. Like, it's kind of like, it might be a minute before working group last call gets issued, or it might be months. Because the basic idea is that it's going to take some time to actually do these reviews and make sure that the stuff is done. So basically, like, the FAT is like, hey, if you want to maintain these properties, here's the kind of analysis that we think would kind of work. Now, they have an opinion, but they're not in charge, right? So at the end of the day, that input gets submitted back into the working group last call process, and the working group gets to decide whether or not they really kind of agree with that. Now, you can see that we kind of did that recently with Russ's draft, the 8773 BIS draft, where it came through and it was like, yeah, we think we need some review. And then we actually had a call for like, all right, are we going to do this? And it's like, yeah, we think we need more analysis. Okay, now we got to go figure out how to get that analysis. But and at the end, the Shepherd write-up will include, for our area directors and for the ISG to review, the analysis of this. So, for example, if the FAT says, hey, we think you need more, and we're like, the working group says, no, we don't think so, we can move on. But we think it's probably important to kind of note that, saying whether the whether there was analysis provided that we decided to ignore, and then why. All right. So this is kind of a general picture of the FAT process, right? Like, kind of, I wanted to subdivide it between what goes on the list and, what's kind of going on with the FAT. And basically, you'll see right down the middle, the FAT liaison is the kind of one going back and forth. So like, the chairs are going to request kind of three things really of the FAT, right? Kind of initial ID review, a stable ID review, and then a formal security analysis if we get some review, because it can happen independently of what's in the draft. So we kind of give that to the FAT, and they're going to assign a liaison, and they're going to review and discuss amongst themselves, and then they're going to fire out the liaison. The liaison is going to send it to the working group, and then we're going to talk about it. And then a bunch of interactions are going to happen, and this FAT liaison person is going to get busy discussing between the two groups how best to make sure that we address the input that they've provided us. And I think that, I kind of drew it in this way to show that, like, there is input. No, that's the fun. Right. So we'll get to that in a second. All right. I guess we could do that now. I don't know. But let me go through this process, right? So this is a bit more of an eye chart. Hopefully you guys can read this. The idea is that you start in the upper left, and you're going to do a working group call for adoption. If the document's not going to get accepted, it's going to go off into the stop processing, because it's not my problem anymore. Then the next thing, two things are going to happen, right? We're essentially the working group's going to start immediately working on the document, but the chairs are also going to kind of request the initial review of the FAT, and then they'll kind of provide it back, and it's going to get provided as input to the working group process, and it's going to the draft is going to kind of iterate around. Now, after the working group's been working on it for a while, something might happen. So the reason why there's the dash lines here for the working group develops a formal security analysis, because that could kind of happen organically on its own. And if that happens, we'll just kind of pump it in the process. But if it doesn't, the working group's going to kind of keep working on the document and keep working on the document. And then at some point, it's going to get stable. And then just as we discussed, we'll probably fire that off to the FAT. They'll start the review process, the liaison with the person interacting, and the working group's going to start working on its the working group last call issues. And so one of the inputs to the working group last call will be like, okay, well, we needed some more analysis, and we needed these other things to happen. And off it goes. And then it kind of come down. And so then the working group gets to decide, again, are we going to do this formal analysis? Yes or no? And if it says yes, or if it's already been done, we can forward it back over to the FAT for review to make sure that we get the thumbs up, or to actually provide the analysis. And that's kind of that arrow right there from the develop formal security analysis to the FAT review process is probably, in my mind, the big question. It's like, okay, they say we need a review, we need some analysis, and we don't have any. So how do we get some? So that's the part I think we still need to discuss or figure out. But basically the idea then is if the FAT review, if the thing is going well and everybody gets, we do the analysis and it passes the FAT, comes back out in the working group and we've addressed the last call comments and off we go. So then in the Shepherd write-up, we'll write up the thing. We'll say what the pluses and minuses are for the security analysis and what got covered and what didn't, and then off we go. And so I guess at this point, I'm willing to kind of entertain the questions. And I think Chris and some others might have the idea for summarizing the need for anonymous reviews. I don't know that it's so much anonymous because the list of people that are actually on the FAT is actually known. The other thing is mostly there is this in the IETF, there's this idea, I think, from a lot of people in leadership that like everybody wants to know about all of the minutia processes that happen in the IETF. And I think most people actually don't want to know. And so we kind of want to get like some like, hey, get some input. Great. Like the first one is just a pure sniff test. It's like, you guys are insane. You're like injecting crazy things in here that makes the protocol easier to break. Just, fix it. Right. And the other more detailed process, I think, we want them to be able to discuss amongst themselves and kind of come up with some consensus. So, Deirdre?
Agreed. All participants of the FAT will be known, and all participants that contribute to any feedback that comes through the liaison will be known. The discussion with a lot of parties is that there sometimes are very diverging views on what kind of analysis some change may require to get certainty or whatever, even amongst experts in the field. Some people may think it needs some, hardcore symbolic analysis with a heavy duty tool. Some people think it doesn't, and you can just, update a pen and paper proof and then you'll be good to go. And it's clear that they do not want to do the down and dirty discussion out in public because they want to be able to have the freedom to disagree amongst themselves and then come to some consensus and then present the consensus as a team and then bring that to the working group. And then the working group would be able to ask questions back and forth via the liaison. That seems to be the primary, thing that we're trying to achieve, or at least the participants in the FAT were trying to achieve. If everything was out in the open on a mailing list for everyone to see, it gets gross and grotty and everyone feels uncomfortable and feel like they're out in public in the town square with their knickers off. We want people to be able to participate and contribute their expertise to the protocol, but without literally scaring them away.
All right. So we'll throw the floor open. Does anybody have any additional? I mean, obviously there's more questions. I think the question, I see that Russ is on, the question kind of comes up is like, okay, so the working group's gone through this process and a couple of people said yes. So now we got to go get some review. Great. Where do we get that? Right. That's kind of the next big question of how we figure that out. Now, I think longer term, when the CFRG comes up with their formal methods work and it gets more formal and it gets better and maybe more automated, it'll be easier for people like me to be able to drop stuff in and actually get a response. In the beginning, I think it's going to be a little bit more like beg, borrow, and steal to ask your friends to help you get through the process. Oh, you're right. It's the UFMRG. Correct, Chris. I conflated CFRG with the IRTF because the CFRG is the one group in the IRTF I deal with. Deirdre, I think you're on mute.
We've previously been like, here is a document. For example, if someone is bringing a new document and they say, consider this for adoption, we would not block an adoption call, but the first chance they would see is, what does your gut tell you just looking at this brand new document to the working group? And we gave them, I think, 2 weeks last time, but we may, depending on feedback from FAT members, ask them for more, if they need more time to come to consensus, because the first time that we did this, it was just very like, each person gave their feedback, and then we collated it together, and we just kind of gave it to the working group. And it was kind of a bit of a like, what am I supposed to take away from this? Because there were some disagreeing opinions in places. If they need more time, maybe 3 weeks, maybe a month. We'll see. But hopefully the sniff test will be on the order of weeks. The actual development of the actual analysis that they recommend may take a long time, or it may take a short amount of time, depending if it's like, this just has a proof and we can just update the proof and just make sure that this doesn't break existing pen and paper proofs. But we also need to nail down a person who is willing to do the work for us, and they may be busy and so on and so forth. So the review process may be on the order of weeks, maybe 1 or 2 months if we're being a bit conservative, but actually getting the analysis in hand, actually like delivered to the working group, may take a lot longer, or it'll probably be at least on the order of months. But luckily, the working group process generally has affordance for that. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, I was going to say in the middle, weeks and months, measurements, not years. And again, the sniff test, I hope, ends up being weeks at most. Luckily, most of the things that we work on are not that required to be that fast. I think the times the TLS working group has actually had to move quickly, it's been everybody needed to move quickly, and everybody showed up, and resources got applied, and people, really smart people, found time to fix the stuff. And there's other times where it's like, we could get on that, and then it finds its way in the natural pecking order of people's workdays. Because we certainly don't want it to be years, because I don't want this to be a gating function, because then I have to deal with people yelling at me constantly at every meeting. And that we think that's not a great thing. Russ?
So if I try and apply this flow chart, for lack of a better word, to where we are with 8773 BIS, I get a little bit concerned, because we're already down to the is formal analysis needed? Yes. Who's going to do it? Question.
Yep.
Further, 8773 is already published as an experimental, and people have decided they're not going to wait for this unknown amount of time. And so they're proceeding to reference 8773 in other standards track documents as a down ref. So it seems to me we're in deadlock. How will we get out of it?
My quick response off the cuff, which is flippant, is we need to get the analysis done. And I know that is a lot easier said than done. And so that is the crux of it, right? At the end of the day, they can proceed forward. They think they're good. We've had some people that said, there's some discussion going on about the rigor that needs to be done. But unfortunately, until we get the analysis done, I don't know that we can fix this, because I don't know that we can block other people from doing the down ref.
Yeah, you certainly can't, and because there'll be an IETF last call that makes the determination as to whether the down ref is okay or not. The other thing is, I'm trying to work with a guy who's willing to do the formal analysis, but only, in his spare time. And that's already taken multiple months. And we have one fat member who says, wow, this is a big change. And we have another fat member who says, this is so trivial, I can't even get a paper out of it. I'd really like to see the fat make that decision. Which of those two is it? Because right now there is no fat consensus.
Yeah. So on your draft, you luckily were our guinea pig, because you're patient about this. We didn't have a fat liaison, and I think that's probably what we need to do. Is we need to get somebody assigned who will take this and then be like, all right, well, the two of you or the two of us need to get in a room. But the fat members need to get in a room and figure out really what it is. And I think that's kind of the ball that's in our court for your particular draft.
I'd like to see that happen soon, not, you know, like before Dublin.
Yeah, I'm cautiously, I see Deirdre's head going sideways, but I'm cautiously optimistic that we might be able to suck some people in to maybe do that.
I mean, I'd like to hear the answer in Dublin, not say, oh, great, we're going to hear it by Bangkok.
Fair enough. I understand. Because again, while Russ's draft is in this process, there are probably 4 drafts that are waiting to get dropped in the process, right? We got the DTLS return routability draft. We got, a Cipher Suite draft, which I think maybe won't affect anything, but we're going to drop it in anyways and see what happens. Though it is putting RSA back in, so I don't know really what that means. There's like 3 or 4 other drafts, and I think we've been kind of holding back on dropping other things into this process until we can kind of figure out how to unstuck Russ's draft, basically, because then the queue is just going to get out of control. And again, I think we were in this problem because we didn't have a liaison who was willing to kind of fight it out a little bit or help facilitate discussions a little. I need to be more positive about this. A little more in the fat before the reviews came out. Deirdre?
Oh, and I wanted to make a note that the liaisons probably will rotate, especially per document. So it's not going to be the same person that's just like completely like underwater with like, okay, now this one and this one and this one. It's like we're going to be proposing that for a document, a person on the FAT will be the liaison, and they get to rotate it however they want to do it.
I was going to say, Deirdre, how big is the FAT at this point? I was just looking for a little.
I think it's at least 6 or 7 people. It's either 6, and then we've had 2 suggestions to be added, or 7, I think. And let me go pull up.
6. So I see 6, and we have like 2 more. So I think the other thing is that because TLS is interesting, I'm hoping that we can actually grow the FAT and could make this easier. So the fact that we started out with like to be honest, like, Karthik and Kaz and Doug, and Dennis, we had the hardcore people in line. And Dennis, are you here too? I thought I saw Dennis.
Dennis is here.
Dennis.
Yeah, I'm about.
Hey, so I just, I don't know. Does this sound crazy to you? I mean, I know you're not speaking, we're not pointing you like the czar, the whole thing, but if you were a person that was doing some of these reviews, does this sound reasonable?
Yeah, I mean, it's the first time I've seen this flow chart, and it's a flow chart of sufficient scale to scare me slightly.
Yes.
But I think it seems like a sensible process. I think the biggest thing that we just need to be mindful of is that we want to ask questions about formal verification to the FAT panel. We don't want to ask them questions about IETF process.
Yes.
That's the key distinction. And ultimately, It's for the working group to decide whatever, however to proceed on the basis of that analysis and triage. But yeah, I think it looks pretty reasonable.
Yeah, because I mean, basically, the gray little thingies over top of these other rectangle things are the kind of really where the FAT process comes into play, and the first slide is really kind of the really what's going to get dumped in is the ID, the initial ID, a stable ID, and any formal analysis that actually gets happen, and then the liaison is the person that really is going to kind of down here is where the discussion happens, as opposed to inundating everybody on the FAT. So, all right. I'll throw open the floor again. I know this is process, but we really didn't want to do this at a big meeting with the 300 people in the audience. So if anybody has anything that they want to say, feel free. Because I think the only point that I had the issues, how do we get the formal analysis, if it's requested and the authors don't have the expertise, how do we do that? And I think that's kind of the big open question.
Yeah, that is still kind of we don't have a good solution other than we try to find them. We try to get recommendations via the FAT, via the community versus the formal methods group. I know that we have at least one person in the formal methods group that I think that we're like, oh, you should, please, would you consider being on the FAT, please, for your expertise. It's still kind of at the very least, what we have written down and what Sean made this diagram, so thank you, Sean, is to get the very first gut check of we're making this change or we're adding this thing to TLS 1.3. What do you think? Do you think this like, oh, I would really love to see an updated model of that, or, oh yeah, that you just tweak that thing in this proof over here. And like, but that's kind of like thankless work. And like, we just want to make sure that the proof checks out. And then we would be confident that this would maintain something like that is like the bare minimum of what we're trying to achieve here. And then the next step is the harder step of like, no, I really think we need like an updated Tamarin model or a ProVerif model, or I don't even know, like a CryptoVerif model or something like that. That's a little bit more work. You might be able to bootstrap off of something that exists, but it is more work. And it's like, who's going to do the work? And now that's the harder human problem of like, who's got the expertise, who's got the time, who's got the cycles, and who's incentivized to do it. For the good of humanity, or maybe there'll be something interesting and they might be able to write it up and get a research result out of it. Who knows? Train up a grad student on their favorite tool. Who knows? That's hopefully a little bit of the carrot of participating in the FAT, not just you want to do good for the people who use TLS 1.3 in the world. But it's difficult. So we welcome any suggestions about how to like make that a little bit more. A little less squishy. It may be just squishy indefinitely just by the nature of the work. There's only so many people and you just have to find them. And then I had something else to say and I don't remember what it was. So.
All right. Well, so that kind of brings to close the regularly scheduled program. If it took us 35 minutes to get through this and I'm not getting stabbed in the back, I'm feeling pretty good about this. I'm glad we didn't do this in Dublin, because I think we would have had 200 people rolling their eyes at us. But all right, if this doesn't sound terrible, I think I'm going to send out a summary of the list that like this seems like the kind of the way forward. Obviously, others can let us know what they think. But I think we're going to try to progress forward on this. And Russ, we're going to try to figure out how to get somebody to volunteer to be the liaison to help get this process kickstarted, to get you through the process, because we're basically just going to start dropping drafts through the process.
Oh, and I remember what I was going to say before. One thing that seems clear with if we do need to do more detailed modeling with some of these formal methods tools, the adoption will kick off the kind of interaction with the FAT. And if they recommend a more formal modeling, the interaction with whoever's going to do it. It may be via someone that we connect with the FAT, or it may be a completely other party, like it seems to have evolved with Russ's draft. But it will continue to evolve between adoption, which is kind of the start, and the working group last call. Ideally, it'll be kind of this continual back and forth of like, we start modeling, it has questions, it comes back, we update the document starts reflecting in the model. And by the time we get to the working group last call, which is kind of like the last chance for the FAT to like look at the work that's been done and either say, did you do the thing that we recommended you do? Did that recommendation, is that still valid? Like between the thing that got adopted and the thing that's coming up for working group last call, is like the thing that we recommended still even drastically, or sometimes they don't change.
Whoops. I think maybe we just lost Deirdre.
She's gone.
Yeah, I just noticed she popped off. I could still, oh, maybe she's coming back. Interesting.
I think Meet Echo kicked me out just as I was in the middle.
Yep, you're back.
All right, I'm back. But yeah, so the process of actually doing the formal analysis with the document authors and whoever is actually working on it, and then the interaction with the FAT via the liaison, is probably going to be like an ongoing process between the start, which is the adoption, and the working group last call. If nothing happens between a recommendation of doing some sort of analysis and the working group last call, the FAT can basically say like, well, we recommended you do a thing and you didn't do it, so we still recommend it. Or they may come back and look at the final document and say, we once recommended something and it completely changed and you didn't do it, which is correct. We don't, you changed the thing so much that it doesn't apply anymore. Or vice versa. We might have something come through in between adoption and the working group last call. The thing looks so different that you're like, wow, if this had looked like this when we first looked at it, we might have recommended something. Those things are possible, but the whole point being that it's sort of a back and forth between the document authors, anyone who's doing any formal modeling or any modeling at all, and then the FAT over the course of the lifetime of the document. So.
Yeah, I mean, that's when it's like the working group addresses last call comments. Another last call comment might be you're doing it all wrong, and then the actual result is the document doesn't go forward. It goes all the way back to working group development, develops ID like 6 boxes previously, right? And then unfortunately the whole process might start again. And so the hope is that we've got things that are fairly well enough baked, I guess, to get going, that we can figure out whether we're changing things dramatically. I think that some of the extensions that we add might not be a big deal, but some are. And like basically we know that anything that touches this key schedule, apparently, or the authentication framework, gets interesting. And we'll go from there, because I know there's some like other people that are looking to do like verifiable credentials and other things in TLS, and so it can get exciting.
Another thing that I keep getting reminded of is when I initially proposed some sort of process like this, I was keeping it quite close to anything that changes the key schedule or other, primary cryptographic components of TLS 1.3 and only TLS 1.3, because that's the thing that's gotten all this good analysis, such that it would affect its proven security properties. And I understand that not everyone understands that kind of narrow scope when they're just bringing a document to TLS working group. They may be bringing a document and thinking, I need to wait for a FAT analysis or blah, 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 blah at some point, which is not necessarily the case. Like we already, I think we went to working group last call for the SSL keylog stuff. There's probably going to be a non-trivial amount of documents that come to the working group that don't have to even talk to the FAT at all, because they're not changing anything about these specific cryptographic mechanisms and security guarantees of TLS 1.3. So I just wanted to flag that, like, not every single document that comes to the working group is going to have to go through this process or even like consider triggering this process at all. So I just wanted to flag that.
All right. As I said somewhere in one of my slides, the agenda need not grow to fill the entire time slot. So if people are done and I'm going to send out a summary. People can add whatever they want. Just a quick summary to say that looks like the process basically that we document is going forward, obviously, and note that one of the big questions we have is how do we get review if the authors don't have the expertise when it's being requested, and like how do we fix that? So if nobody else has anything else to add. All right, I guess now I see Paul typing things there. Paul, does any of this send up red flags in your AD's head as we're going forward? Oh, almost. I saw you come on and then you went away. You're going to blame TLS.
Let's try again. No. I'm going to blame double mute. I know this. It's all good. It's all good. No issues from my end.
Okay, cool. And again, I think we will have to revisit this if the time frames start to stretch on longer and longer, and the number of months starts to be getting to I'd say before double digits. Then we gotta figure out how to fix this. And maybe part of that is actually going back to the formal analysis triage team and group and being like, we want to maintain this pact. How do we figure out how to get that done? And if that implies getting shekels or something, maybe we can figure out who we can go to and be like, all right, how do we get this to happen if you want to maintain this? And there's some there are some people out in the world that might do that, and so I think it would also be interesting to see how getting the fat bigger and also maybe ensuring that the UMFRG or whatever the name of that link was that Chris sent, if they get automated tools and they can make it easier so you can just drop stuff in, then that couldn't be a bad thing. So we might actually be helping each other along the way. But I want to, I'm afraid I don't want to gate an IRTF process as well, because I think that's even more interesting. So, but with that, going once, going twice. Yeah, that wouldn't be bad, Chris. Maybe I'll send them a message, see when their session is. Let's go ahead and call it quits. I want to thank Joe for taking notes. Wonderful taking notes. And again, I'll send a quick summary. I guess the other thing is we're having a meeting. We already have 6 or 7 requests for slots for things. So if you want to talk about anything, you probably need to get your request in pretty quick. And I guess we'll see you all in Dublin. All righty.
Yay. Thank you.
All right. Ciao.
Bye-bye.